You don't always notice it at first. The slow, quiet transformation happening inside you, the subtle shift in your thoughts, the way certain words begin to echo in your mind that aren't entirely yours, the way moods that don't belong to you suddenly feel familiar, the way you start carrying pieces of people you never meant to hold so closely. And this is the strange paradox life whispers to you in moments of stillness. You become the people you spend time with, not by force, not by conscious choice, but by an invisible exchange of energy, beliefs, emotional rhythms, and unspoken patterns that weave themselves into your identity without asking permission. And as you sit with yourself, really sit, you begin to sense that your inner landscape is not entirely self-constructed, that parts of your personality are borrowed artifacts from others, parts of your courage shaped by someone you admired, parts of your doubts seeded by someone you feared, parts of your softness nurtured by someone who held you gently, and parts of your hardness formed by someone who didn't. You begin to notice how your linguistic patterns mirror the voices you hear often, how your emotional responses resemble those you've lived around, how your worldview bends in the direction of the minds you let close, and suddenly you're confronted with a quiet question. Who are you, truly? And who have you simply absorbed? And the deeper you feel into this, the more you realize that human beings are permeable creatures, shaped less by intention and more by proximity, influenced more by environment than philosophy, molded more by presence than ideas. And this awareness pulls you into a soft tension. The awareness that your life is not only shaped by your choices, but by the people you grant access to your inner world. And this realization becomes the thin thread leading you into part 2, the everyday illusion where most people move through life unaware of this silent exchange shaping them moment by moment. Because if you look closely, if you really watch, you'll see that most people live unconsciously, drifting through life absorbing pieces of others without ever questioning what they're allowing into their minds. You see it in the way friends adopt each other's slang without noticing, the way co-workers start complaining in the same rhythm, the way family members inherit fears they never examined, the way someone becomes more cynical simply because cynicism was the language spoken in their home, the way gentle spirits harden around harsh people, and the way insecure souls shrink around judgmental ones. The world is filled with borrowed identities, second-hand emotions, hand-me-down beliefs passed around like old clothes, and we wear them without checking if they fit. Watch the subtle transformations happening in everyday spaces. A teenager who spends time with anxious friends begins to distrust themselves. A spouse unknowingly mirrors the irritability of their partner. A worker adopts the burnout energy of colleagues rushing through life. A friend becomes louder or quieter depending on who they sit beside. A person who once dreamed boldly now dreams smaller because they spend time with those who fear ambition. And none of this is spoken aloud. None of it is deliberate. These transformations happen in the background, like software updating without your approval, like water shaping stone without announcing its intentions. You see this in social gatherings where people unconsciously sync their expressions, mimic each other's posture, borrow each other's sense of humor, and shift their tone to belong. You see it in families where emotional patterns pass through generations like invisible heirlooms. Grandparents carrying unhealed wounds that echo in parents who echo them again in their children. Not through direct teaching, but through atmosphere, through tone, through the emotional climate created by presence. And if you move through a workplace long enough, you start blending with its culture. You pick up its pace, its tension, its language, its norms. And without noticing, the place that once felt foreign becomes a mirror in which you see versions of yourself you didn't know you were becoming. What's even more striking is how people rarely question this phenomenon. They assume their personality is fixed, their desires self-originated, their worldview purely self-created, when in truth the mind is porous, absorbing subtle cues like a sponge, absorbing frustration, ambition, joy, sarcasm, impatience, hope, resentment, gratitude, and fear simply through repeated exposure. And once you begin to notice this in others, the uncomfortable realization dawns in yourself. You too have been shaped by people in ways you never consciously agreed to. Maybe someone's negativity once seeped into your optimism until your bright inner world dimmed without you realizing. Maybe someone's confidence helped you walk taller. Maybe someone's self-doubt made you question paths you once believed in. Maybe someone's emotional chaos became your emotional landscape. Maybe someone's calm became your sanctuary. And as these realizations gather like quiet waves, you start seeing the everyday illusion with sharper clarity. The illusion that you are unaffected, that your identity stands independently, that the people you spend time with are simply background characters rather than co-authors of your inner script. But the truth, once felt deeply, cannot be unfelt. Everyone you allow close becomes a part of your becoming, whether you notice or not, shaping the way you speak, the way you feel, the way you move toward or away from your potential. And this awareness pulls you deeper into a quiet, almost haunting recognition that your life's direction might not be as self-chosen as you once believed. And from here, the script begins its descent into awakening, the part of you that starts asking harder questions, sensing deeper truths, feeling the subtle danger of living unaware and wondering what happens when you finally open your eyes to the invisible forces shaping you every day. There comes a moment, quiet, unsettling, unmistakable, when you begin to wake up from the unconscious absorption you've lived inside for years, when something in you shifts, like a curtain lifting from a window you didn't know was covered, and you suddenly see how deeply other people's energy has been living inside you. You begin to notice that some of your fears aren't truly yours, that some of your reactions were inherited, that the inner critic you hear isn't your voice, but an echo of someone who once doubted you, that your hesitation mirrors someone else's insecurity, and this realization hits you with a strange mix of clarity and grief, because awakening is never just discovery. It is also mourning the years you spent becoming versions of yourself molded by proximity rather than truth. You start questioning everything you once accepted as stable, the beliefs you defend, the expectations you carry, the moods that visit you, the dreams you chase, and even the tone of your inner dialogue. And the more you question, the more you begin to see subtle fingerprints everywhere. Fingerprints of family in your guilt, fingerprints of friends in your humor, fingerprints of partners in your habits, fingerprints of colleagues in your sense of urgency, and fingerprints of society in your anxieties. Awakening feels like watching your identity break apart into pieces and realizing that many pieces were never really you. And this moment, this trembling awareness, marks the beginning of deep psychological recalibration, a shift in inner gravity, a quiet rebellion against the influences you once absorbed without resistance. But awakening is not gentle. It is sharp, like light hitting your eyes after years spent in dimness. It exposes how easily you were shaped, how quickly you blended in, how silently you drifted into versions of yourself curated by the people you surrounded yourself with. And as this truth settles into your chest, you feel something inside you tighten, something like a warning, something like a whisper saying, "Now that you see, you can no longer unsee." This clarity, however, carries a cost, because the moment you start reclaiming your mind, the world around you begins to feel unfamiliar. You look at your social circle and realize some people don't align with the person you're becoming. You listen to conversations that once entertained you but now feel shallow. You walk into certain environments and feel an energetic friction you never noticed before, and slowly, painfully, you begin to detach. Not out of superiority, not out of anger, but out of the quiet necessity to breathe. This leads you into the deeper terrain of Part 4, the isolation that arrives when you awaken before the people around you. Suddenly, the relationships you once leaned on feel strange, mismatched, stretched thin by the distance created by your new awareness. You listen to others speak and hear not just their words, but the beliefs behind them, the fears beneath them, the generational wounds shaping them. And this level of perception makes interactions heavier, denser, more emotionally demanding. You start feeling misunderstood, not because you cannot express yourself, but because the language you now speak is too rooted in self-awareness for those who still live unconsciously. And so you shrink your truths, soften your insights, dim your depth. Not because you want to, but because you know not everyone has the capacity to meet you where you now stand. You might think of someone from your life, a friend, a sibling, a partner, who once fit you perfectly, but now feels emotionally distant, not because anything dramatic happened, but simply because you grew and they stayed still. You began questioning your patterns while they kept repeating theirs. You started examining your emotions while they kept numbing theirs. You pursued self-awareness while they pursued familiarity. And what once felt like alignment now feels like translation, as if every conversation requires you to interpret yourself through their limited lens. And in this slow, drifting apart, you experience the ache of awakening, the ache of realizing that growth demands distance, that awareness creates separation, that clarity sometimes leaves you standing alone. You begin spending more time by yourself, not because isolation feels good, but because it feels honest. Solitude becomes the only place where you don't have to shrink, mask, explain, or tolerate energies that drain you. And yet this solitude often feels bittersweet, liberating but lonely, peaceful but heavy, empowering but isolating, because now you can no longer return to the unconscious comfort you once lived in, and the world you are stepping into hasn't fully formed yet. In this isolation, you begin seeing people not through who they pretend to be, but through their emotional patterns, patterns they don't even realize they project. You see the friend who constantly jokes to hide insecurities, the relative who criticizes because they fear insignificance, the partner who withdraws because they fear intimacy, the co-worker who competes because they fear inadequacy, and you begin to understand that you've been absorbing these energies for years without noticing. But now that you notice, you can feel every vibration more intensely, every emotional ripple, every unconscious projection. And this sensitivity makes connection harder because you are no longer simply participating. You are observing, feeling, absorbing, decoding, and every social interaction becomes an emotional equation you didn't ask to solve. And yet, amidst this isolation, something powerful happens. You begin rediscovering the parts of yourself that were buried beneath the influence of others, the parts that were overshadowed by louder personalities, the parts that were silenced by environments that didn't understand you. You begin reclaiming your voice, not the voice shaped by your surroundings, but the one that existed before you adapted, before you mirrored, before you absorbed, and this reclamation feels like coming home to a version of yourself you forgot you lost. This is the painful beauty of awakening. You lose people, but you find yourself. You walk alone, but you walk in truth. You detach from the familiar, but you reconnect with the authentic. And though the world feels emptier, your inner world feels wider, deeper, more honest than it has ever been. It is here, alone, quiet, aware, that you begin realizing that becoming is not just about who influences you, but about who you choose to continue allowing in, and who you must let go so you can grow into the person you are always meant to be. And then, without warning, without ceremony, without any grand spiritual music swelling in the background, something inside you shifts. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock. It simply arrives, like a whisper that somehow feels louder than your entire life. Maybe it happens in the middle of a conversation you're not even invested in, when you suddenly notice how every sentence people speak is stitched together by fear or desire. Maybe it happens during a quiet walk home, when the air feels a little too honest, and the world feels a little too transparent. Or maybe it happens in the mirror, when you see your own eyes looking back at you. Not the version you show everyone else, but the one that's been watching from a distance, waiting for you to finally notice it. That moment is the beginning of awakening, though it rarely feels like one. It feels more like a soft unraveling, a thinning of the veil, a realization that the things you thought were solid, your thoughts, your habits, your identity, your relationships, are actually fluid, shaped constantly by the people and energies around you. You don't become aware of the world. You become aware of the invisible currents beneath it. You start noticing how people mimic the tones of the ones they want approval from, how groups speak in shared rhythms, how one person's anxiety spreads like smoke through a room, how laughter is contagious not because of humor, but because humans cling to connection. You begin to see how you have absorbed fragments of everyone you've ever been close to, their fears, their beliefs, their reactions, their ways of seeing, and that realization is both beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful, because it means you were never as alone as you felt. Terrifying, because it means the person you call me might be a mosaic built from the people you've allowed near your heart, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The world becomes clear in a way that almost hurts. You sense motives beneath words, patterns beneath actions, truth beneath masks, and something in you whispers, if I am shaped by the people I spend time with, then who am I becoming right now? That is the beginning of awakening, the moment you stop sleepwalking through the world and start noticing the invisible hands writing your story. And from that moment on, everything changes, because now you're no longer just living. You're watching yourself live. Awakening sounds noble in books and movies, but in real life, it's far quieter and far heavier. It isolates you in ways you never expected. Suddenly, the conversations you once floated through begin to feel strangely hollow. You hear people discuss dreams that aren't their own, opinions inherited from someone else, fears they never questioned. And instead of joining in, you find yourself quietly stepping back, observing from a distance. It's not arrogance, it's not superiority. It's simply that you've become aware, and awareness changes the texture of everything. You start noticing how rare authenticity is, how people hide behind small talk, behind routines, behind roles they didn't consciously choose. You see friends repeating the same emotional loops they swore they'd escape. You watch loved ones shrinking their lives to fit inside expectations that never belonged to them. And when you try to speak on it, even gently, even lovingly, you feel the room shift. People look at you differently, not because you're wrong, but because you're saying the things they've been trying to avoid. So you learn to say less, to carry insight quietly, to hold your understanding like a secret you're not sure the world is ready for. And in that quiet carrying, you begin to feel a soft ache, the ache of isolation. There's a story, simple but painfully familiar, a man who sees clearly. He notices that his closest friend keeps choosing partners who belittle him, drain him, fracture his sense of worth. He sees the pattern, the longing for validation, the inherited belief that love must be earned through suffering, the inability to walk away. And he sees the future playing out in slow motion, like a film he's watched 100 times. But every time he tries to help, tries to reveal the pattern, his friend grows defensive, distant, almost offended. So he stops trying. He watches quietly. And in the quiet, he feels a heaviness, not because he was ignored, but because he knows too much. That is the isolation of awareness, the weight of seeing things others don't want to see yet. And so you begin spending more time alone, not because you dislike people, but because the noise of the world feels too loud, too busy, too distracting. Your inner world becomes more spacious, but also more solitary. You start to protect your time, your energy, your thoughts. You become selective, not out of judgment, but out of necessity. Because once you understand that you absorb the people you spend time with, you become careful about who you allow near you. And in that carefulness, you inevitably lose people. Not through conflict, but through quiet distance, through natural drift, through the gentle truth that you're no longer aligned. It is the price of awakening. And yet, this isolation is not the end. It is the midpoint, the tunnel, the necessary descent before the rise. Because only in solitude do you begin to hear your own voice clearly enough to know what comes next.